Cheeseheads. Get on your feet. It's Curd and Long. Hosted by Sparky, Fifer, and Ryan Horvath.
Welcome in another edition of Curd and Long. Steve Sparky Fifer with you. Of course, check out Wisconsin Sports Daily now, weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 on 1250 AM The Fan. We talk Packers, Brewers, and Bucks every single day. That's what sets us apart from the other shows. All three will be talked about. Now, maybe a 7 or 8 minute segment, maybe one day on one of the three, but every day at some point, one of your favorite teams will get talked about. He is Bretl. Check him out at Packers Wire over there and part of the USA Today Network. Follow him on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. You can follow me at Sparky Radio. Paul, thanks for coming on. Wearing the Brew Crew t-shirt today. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the Bucks sweatshirt on beforehand, but I thought this would be better for the time being.
All right, I got a question, though. We got to start off talking about the news. So, obviously, you have to do stuff with Packers Wire, but now you have come over to my side, and now you are involved with my other team, the Colts?
I am. So, I'm still writing for Packers Wire, still over at 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse, helping out there. But, yeah, taken on a much larger responsibility as well as the editor over at Colts Wire. Started that at the beginning of April, right in the midst of obviously draft season.
Right.
So been underway with that, really enjoying it. It's been challenging, but also fun, diving into a whole new football team. And the fun part of that is just completely different than obviously what I'm used to on the Packers side of things.
Well, I'll tell you this, Ballard's a heck of a lot more fun to cover than Gutekunst, because that dude just runs off at the mouth sometimes, dropping F-bombs and everything else. And dude, he is a funny guy. Like, did you see the video that came out of him laughing as it was coming to their pick about Latu still being there? He's like, we're going to get the bleeping best bleeping edge rusher in the draft, just laughing like there's no way he should have fallen to us at this point. He is a character of all sorts. So you will have fun with that. And I was already reading your stuff earlier today on the Colts draft, which nobody on this podcast cares about. So let's get to the Packers draft class and talk about Jordan Morgan. The first pick, which I did not like of this entire draft. That was a pick I was most upset about. I went to sleep Thursday night mad. I woke up Friday mad. Then we had John Cooper on from Our Lads Draft Service. We had Pete Doherty on. Pete Doherty did a really good job of trying to calm me down and pretty much just said, look, there are no absolutes, because I was on Twitter. You can go back and look. It's on record. When they was that 20 or 21 in the first round, I'm on Twitter going, okay, there's Arnold, there's Mitchell. They shouldn't be here. They are. Go get you them. Go get one of them. You have a shutdown corner to play opposite Jair Alexander. They both like to tackle in the run game, unlike Jair Alexander. So either one will work. Get one of them. Dolphins are on the clock. And I'm going, you got to go. Because if it gets to the Eagles in Jacksonville, they both may take one or the other, and you get neither. And they didn't go. That was their best chance. And then those idiots, Lions, come flying in front of you and steal Arnold from you. And then you're left with Jordan Morgan. It has nothing to do with Jordan Morgan as much as it has to do with the fact of I'm convinced both of those corners are good in the NFL. Now, maybe they both will end up sucking and everybody will be right and I will be wrong. But I was pretty bent out of shape on that one. And then if you look at the draft class after that, he didn't take a cornerback to the very end when he took King from Penn State. So clearly corner was not a position that he thought he had a strength in as a top priority, Paul.
Yeah, I actually wrote about that on Sunday following the draft. And for the reasons that you mentioned, we go into it. And the cornerback position before the draft, I feel like how you viewed it drastically shaped, is it an early round need? Is it not? Because you can look at it and go, hey, we got Jair on the outside. You got Stokes and Valentine competing for one of the boundary spots. You got Keyshawn Nixon in the slot. Corey Ballantyne provides you with some experience depth. But then if you swing the pendulum in the other direction, you can go, well, there's no guarantee Valentine makes a year 2 leap. Nobody knows what to expect from Eric Stokes. He was struggling in 22 before his injury, missed almost all of last season.
Yep.
Keyshawn Nixon in the slot. I mean, that's an upgradable position. So beauty's in the eye of the beholder with the cornerback position. And as you mentioned, waiting until the 7th round tells us that the Packers are pretty comfortable with who they have. Now, Gutekunst did say, it wasn't their intention of waiting that long. It's just the board didn't fall how they wanted it to in order to, justify taking a cornerback when they did. But again, that also tells us that it's not a big need in their eyes with who they already have on the roster. Now, with that said, I think they did address the slot cornerback position potentially, or at least add some competition there. Javon Bullard and Evan Williams, safeties, but both players who have slot experience. And John Eric Sullivan, he's the Packers VP of player personnel. He said that they view both of those players as guys who can play in the slot. So potentially they may have upgraded that position. That for sure added some competition depending on how things shake out over the summer with Keyshawn Nixon there. So inadvertently did address that position. And then just going back to the Jordan Morgan pick, I go through a short list that I create of first round prospects every year. And my intention with this is to get it down to literally like 3 or 4 guys. We can all pick out 10, 20 guys that they might.
So this is just for the Packers. This isn't first round grades on everybody.
No,
this is just Packer guys.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And to whittle a list down, I go through past tendencies threshold. So what's their athletic testing? What's their measurements? How old are they? That's been a really key part of first round picks under Brian Gutekunst. And Jordan Morgan did not make that final, I think 5 players that I had. And the big reason is because his arms are under 33 inches. And that's been a very, very hard line in the sand for offensive tackles under not just Brian Gutekunst, but Ted Thompson, Ron Wolf. Like, that's part of the Packers evaluation process. But Brian Gutekunst did say that obviously they picked him. They're not concerned about that. But because of his athleticism, his ability to operate in space, they really, really like that aspect of his game. Very, very experienced player with 2,400 snaps at left tackle. Team captain 2 years at Arizona, which was a theme among many of the Packers draft picks this year. But ultimately what that pick does is it gives the Packers options and flexibility along the offensive line, which they did not have much of coming into the draft. Matt LaFleur said Morgan's going to start out at left tackle, which I think should be expected. It's where really all of his snaps came. So he can compete with Rasheed Walker there. If the Packers want to move Zach Tom to center, we heard, the reports coming up about how strongly they feel about him there. Jordan Morgan gives you an option to play on the right side. So that gives you that flexibility to move him inside. Jordan Morgan was also Dane Brugler of the Athletics' number 2 guard in this class. Brian Gutekunst said they believe he can play 4 of the 5 positions on the offensive line. So if they want to keep Walker at tackle, Tom at tackle, and have Jordan Morgan compete with Sean Ryan, who needs competition at right guard, they can do that as well. So once, the dust settled a little bit on that selection and I took a step back, you look at the athleticism, being a team captain, the versatility that he provides. Although he didn't make my short list, he checks a lot of those boxes that says this is a very, very Packers pick and gives them options, flexibility, as they always say, to try to put their best 5 on the field.
Taking a guard in the first round is not something I highly advise. I'm not a big fan of taking guards in the first round. I can get guards later. You could have gotten a guard, a good one, BB from Kansas State, whoever, they're in the second round. You did not have to take that. And then you hear Goody talking about, oh, yeah, I could have moved back in the first round. Yeah, I could have moved back into the second round, but I had to have my guy, Jordan Morgan. Okay, well, if you had to have your guy, Jordan Morgan, he better be a damn tackle at this point if you're going to sit there and play this. If I'm a guessing man of how this is going to play, I bet you Zach Tom ends up going into guard. And I bet you Walker or Morgan are the tackles. Now, who plays where? Don't know. But I'm with everybody else that those arms are of big concern. And I brought it up last week. Look, if he's a Pro Bowl guard, good. But if Arnold or Mitchell are a Pro Bowl corner, I'd rather have the Pro Bowl corner. If he's a Pro Bowl right tackle and they're a Pro Bowl corner, I'd rather have the Pro Bowl corner. The only time where I take him is if he's a Pro Bowl left tackle. I don't see it. So unless that happens, or these other two completely flop and neither one are as good as I think, there's going to be a lot of told you so's coming from my side of the world before this whole thing is said and done. Now, having said that, let's move on. I love the rest of the draft class. Like round 2, A+, A+++++. To get Edger and Cooper first, and you get a Cooper, and not the one that I didn't want in DeJean. And then you come back and get Javon Bullard, like you said, at Georgia, which to me helps. If he's a captain and he's got the maturity, that could do nothing but help Quay Walker and Devontae White in that locker room. So bringing him in to play safety, and then Cooper, who is an athlete that can run like Quay Walker, I don't think he could have done any better in the second round.
Yeah, I really liked all those picks, and focusing on the linebacker position specifically. Obviously, a lot of the conversation the last few months has been about, the 4-3 defense, the change from 3-4 to 4-3, who's going to be the Will, the Mike, the Sam. But Brian Gutekunst has been, pretty upfront about that throughout this entire process, saying he's not too concerned about it. What he wants is versatility. He wants guys who can wear multiple hats. And there's a lot of similarities in build, skill set, play style of Edgerrin Cooper and Quay Walker. And so when you have those players who can move sideline to sideline to fill gaps that appear in the running game that you can utilize as blitzers, both have the athleticism to operate in space, in coverage when needed, that gives Jeff Hafley just a ton of flexibility in terms of where he asks them to go, what he asks them to do. And from the offensive perspective can cause some chaos and not necessarily knowing where they're going to be. And so that's been Brian Gutekunst's focus as he fills out that linebacker room, not pigeonholing players into specific roles and saying, you're the middle linebacker, you're the will linebacker, but versatile guys that can wear many hats and that can be moved around. And similarly, that's been his MO at the safety position as well. He's continually used the term interchangeable. He wants the 2 safety spots and the nickel to be interchangeable. And he hit that out of the park by getting Javon Bullard, who in 2022 was Georgia's primary slot corner. In 2023, he was spent most of his snaps as a free safety. And at that position, the safety position, you can add, Evan Williams in there, Oladapo, Hopper, Cooper at linebacker. There is a definite shift, not just in the draft, but this offseason in the type of players that they're bringing in from a fast, aggressive, and physical standpoint. Like they are trying to change the way that this defense plays. And that started with hiring Jeff Hafley. Matt LaFleur said when Hafley had his introductory press conference, Matt LaFleur didn't set out saying, I want a 4-3 defense now. Who do I think is the best guy to operate a 4-3 defense? He said, I wanted to find the right guy. I wanted to find the right guy who's willing to adjust, who can simplify the game plan so guys can just go out and react instead of overthinking. I want a guy who brings energy to this defense, because he said, how can we expect our players to have energy on the field if we as the coaching staff aren't doing that as well? And that was Jeff Hafley. And it just so happened that he ran a 4-3. If Jeff Hafley ran a 3-4, I think he would still be there. That's just kind of a byproduct of bringing in the right person. And so now that high energy, that more aggressive approach that Hafley brings, he utilized a lot of 5-6 man pressures at Boston College on third downs. We know he's going to utilize more press man. They're trying to match that with the type of players they're bringing in. And you go watch Edgerrin Cooper, Javon Bullard, Tyron Hopper, fast, physical, aggressive players. So beyond just their fit from a schematic standpoint, the versatility, I love the type of players that they're bringing in for this Packers defense.
Now you keep bringing up Tyron Hopper, so let's talk about him quick before we get to the running back that they took in the 3rd round. There was a lot of head scratching, I think, going on from Packer fans when they made that pick, because they looked at it and they said, no, wait a second, you just got one. Why in the world are you coming back and taking another linebacker here in the 2nd round when you took the best linebacker in the class to begin with? And that was addressed as well after the draft as far as how they want to play Hopper and him together.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I know we focus on what's the needs today, but the draft's a long-term approach. Isaiah McDuffie's in his final year of his contract. Eric Wilson just signed a 1-year deal. Brian Gutekunst has said in shifting to a 4-3, just from a roster construction standpoint, they're going to need additional linebackers in terms of the quantity than what they've had in previous years. And this was a position group that was pretty thin from a quantity standpoint at the linebacker position. So all 3 of those things I just mentioned are reasons why they felt that they had to double dip at that position. Then you look at what Hopper does on the field. Again, he played a lot of that strong side linebacker role at Missouri. Very good closer to the line of scrimmage in the run game, fast, physical. Brian Gutekunst talked about his ability to just take on blockers, his willingness, the physicality that he brings. Again, goes in with what I just discussed about the other players and that mentality that they bring. So again, we zoom out and take a look at the roster construction, what the Packers are trying to do on that side of the ball. And it was a pick that made sense.
All right, let's talk about the running back. I wanted Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. He was there. They didn't go that way. They want Marshawn Lloyd, the running back, out of USC. To which I say, fine with me. I'm good, because he's a stud. I don't have a lot of issues with that running back pick. And My biggest concern was that we were going to get to day 3, it would be the 5th round, and they still wouldn't have taken a running back. That's where my concern was going in, because it just felt like there weren't many of us stomping our fist here saying you have to get a running back in the first 2 days. There were a lot of people like, we'll just get Ray Davis out of Kentucky on day 3. Oh, it'll be fine. There was a lot of that nonsense going on, and I was like, oh my God, I do not want to do that. Like, get me somebody that can be the guy that replaces Josh Jacobs, because I look at Josh Jacobs, hey, he's got some wear and tear on him too. I mean, it wasn't like he didn't play at Alabama and wasn't the only part of that offense that worked with the Raiders. So he's got some mileage on him, just like Aaron Jones had mileage on him from that perspective. So if this is a 2-year deal, hopefully whoever you draft this year is that premier running back then going forward when you decide to part ways with Josh Jacobs. I think this Lloyd kid could be that.
Yeah, he's a very similar type of running back to Josh Jacobs. I think Jacobs is 5'10", 223. Lloyd's 5'9", 220. Thick running backs who, Josh Jacobs has shown that he can handle a heavy workload, and both players it sounds like are going to be big parts of the passing game. We obviously know Josh Jacobs has done that during his time in the NFL with Las Vegas. Matt LaFleur has talked about how excited he is to get Josh Jacobs in the offense in the passing game. And after the draft, when he was speaking with Larry McCarron, Matt LaFleur talked about that same idea with Marshawn Lloyd. Lloyd is similar to A.J. Dillon in the respect of he doesn't have this abundance of targets in the passing game during his time in college. But man, when he got those opportunities, I think he averaged over 17 yards per catch at USC last season, which is that's an absurd rate for a running back or even a receiver, honestly. But he is so good with the ball in his hands, so good at operating at space. He was one of the best in college football last season at picking up yards after the catch. So he brings another playmaking dynamic element to the Packers backfield. And that running back 2 role is wide open. I know there's A.J. Dillon, Emmanuel Wilson, but A.J. Dillon is not a roster lock. Like, if they move on for him, I think the dead cap hit is like $65,000, like nothing in NFL terms. So he is not a roster lock. Obviously, the hope is that Emmanuel Wilson could continue to take a step and emerge. He showed some juice last season when he got the ball, but nobody knows that. We have to see if that unfolds or not. So that running back 2 role is very much up for grabs. And like I said, they need another dynamic presence behind Josh Jacobs, because last year when A.J. Dillon primarily filled that role, he averaged 3.4 yards per rush. He's reliable, he's steady, but there's a limitation both, as a ball carrier and then in the passing game, just from a yards after the catch ability that he brings. So if a player like Marshawn Lloyd, who has been so good in space and making defenders miss, if he can emerge this summer as that running back 2 guy when Josh Jacobs isn't on the field, there's a big playmaking presence there available for the Packers.
And he's not short on confidence either. He's telling everybody, I'm the best running back in this draft. I don't know what everybody's talking about. I am the guy in this draft. So he's not lacking confidence coming into this thing with the Green Bay Packers. Should be fun to see how him and Josh Jacobs get along and how that competition kind of, breeds itself out here through training camp. All right. Now, Evan Williams is another guy that you talked about earlier. I've read conflicting things on him as far as his ability to cover. Your thoughts on him as a guy that you brought up earlier, could probably cover in the slot, but just how good is he at doing such a thing?
Yeah, where he played most of his snaps at Oregon last season. He spent 3 years at Fresno State, transferred to Oregon for his final year. A lot of his responsibilities came in the box. Very, very reliable tackler, very good run defender. And then, of course, like any safety, he has free safety snaps. He has slot snaps. But I believe it was, again, John Eric Sullivan, Packers VP of player personnel, watching him at the Senior Bowl, his movement skills in particular, how he operated in space, is a big part of what's given the Packers the confidence that he can handle those slot duties if needed. And again, they have Nixon. Javon Bullard has a ton of experience there, but they said that they view him in kind of a similar light as Javon Bullard in terms of what their responsibilities might be, playing in the slot or playing that deep free safety role. But I understand the question around it, because again, it's not like Bullard where he has all that experience there. There's a bit of projecting. And again, that's what the draft's about. You're drafting who you think they can become, not who they are today. And they really like the movement abilities that Evan Williams brings to the table, along with what he's already shown as a run defender, as a tackler.
I want to talk a little bit before we get the next pick about the Senior Bowl. They did some stuff here. I mean, you start looking at draft picks that were at that Senior Bowl, a part of it. They were dipping in that Senior Bowl quite a bit. and Jim Nagy was on, who runs the Senior Bowl, was on Sirius XM radio on day 3, right? And he said the Packers were hot to trot for Evan Williams, that they were one of the teams that going into the 4th round was talking a lot about wanting to get him with Jim. They were going back and forth talking about this kid. They really utilize that Senior Bowl. Some teams utilize it more than others. It felt like Goody was really all about the Senior Bowl this year.
Yeah, I think I counted. I think it was 8 of their 11 picks participated in the Senior Bowl. And even if we go back 2 years, of the Packers' 24 picks between 22 and 23 drafts, 10 of them were in the Senior Bowl. So obviously a lot more added this year percentage-wise, but that's still been a big part of what they do. And Brian Gutekunst talked about it after the draft. Obviously, it's an all-star game, so you're getting the top talent there. But he mentioned the willingness of the players that week to compete. He likes what that says about who they are, their love of the game. Because these players, they don't have to go there and do that. It's an invitation. It's an honor to be a part of that all-star game. But by choosing to go there, by choosing to compete, and then especially for maybe some of the non-Power 5 players, like he said Travis Glover, the 6th-round pick, I believe, from the offensive tackle from Georgia State, his performance at the Senior Bowl got him on the Packers' radar much more than what it was previously. So it's an event, especially that practice week, that is all about competition. They're not installing the game plans. That's not what the heavy focus is. It's one-on-ones in the trenches. It's one-on-ones on the boundaries. You really get to see what these players are about against high-level competition. And obviously the Packers view what they see there in very, very high regard. And again, I think it was 8 of the 11 picks this year competed in the Senior Bowl. And Javon Bullard was the defensive team. So I believe what they do is the offensive players vote on which defensive back they thought was the best that week. Javon Bullard won it for the American team. And then Evan Williams was chosen for the national team as the defensive specialist of the week.
Oh my, that is something. I didn't know that. That's a nice, good little nugget there from Paul Bretl. Checking some out at Packers Wire. Hey, the other thing I'd like to know, I should just ask Nagy himself. I'd love to know, the history of the last 5 years or 3 years or whatever else. What teams take the most people from the Senior Bowl in the draft? And then how does that equate to how successful, those teams are versus the teams that don't dabble as much in those waters versus others, Paul?
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see. I know some of the past picks in recent years, Devontae Wyatt, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jordan Love back in 2020 was a participant in there. So it's not just the 6th, 7th round guys that the Packers are picking that come out of the Senior Bowl. It is some of their key contributors, Luke Musgrave, Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, 3 others that just came to mind. Like they're investing premium draft capital. And so far, of the guys just mentioned, those have turned out to be pretty good players for the Packers.
So Packers fans, next year when you go, that's a Senior Bowl, who cares? You should care, because that's where your team's being made from. You better, if you watch that and you get to know those guys during the course of the week and then watch the game, you're going to have a good idea of who the Packers are looking at probably going into next year's draft before all of your friends do or anybody else. And you'll have a very good idea of what they're probably going to do in the draft. All right, let's move on to the next draft pick here as we move on to the 5th pick. Jacob Monk, center out of Duke. A little bit of nasty to Monk, a little bit there in the middle. But this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If they believe Tom is the center, then I don't understand this pick as much. I know he can play guard. If they believe Tom is the guard of the future and they're still looking for center, and if this dude is better than Myers at center, they're okay settling in with Tom at guard, then this pick could make a whole heck of a lot of sense and really strengthen this offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, he gives them the flexibility and options to kind of see how things unfold and plug and play him at any of the 3 interior positions. And, even if Monk doesn't end up starting or competing heavily at one of those positions, center or guard, and I think he's going to at least compete. But if he doesn't, he provides depth, which they needed, because we look at that interior offensive line. It was Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Sean Ryan, and Royce Newman. Like that was the depth going into the draft. So even if they view Tom as playing inside, like you still need additional bodies at a minimum for training camp in the preseason, but also with building out your 53-man roster. He provides that versatility. Again, super, super good athlete. I think his relative athletic score is like 9.7 out of 10, two-time team captain at Duke. You're not going to find a much more experienced player than him as well. 57 career starts, playing at 3 different positions. So again, we go back to what the Packers look for in the offensive line, checks a lot of boxes. And Riley Leonard, it was a Duke quarterback. His how he described Monk was, you'll never find someone who's nicer off the field, but has this switch when he's on the field and just turns into the ultimate competitor. And both John Eric Sullivan and Brian Gutekunst, when they were describing Monk, they use the term alpha. So I think the Packers really like the mentality that he brings from a locker room fit, but then on the field as well. Because we look at this offensive line unit last season, obviously down the stretch, they're performing as one of the best in football, but they don't really have any like maulers on that offensive line. And I think that was one area that Sean Ryan, or one element that Sean Ryan brought to the equation, that kind of mauler, aggressive, what he's creating running lanes by, pushing, using his strength, not just being positioned well and creating a running lane that way. I think Jacob Monk brings a little bit more of that edge, that mentality I think this offensive line could benefit from.
John Eric Sullivan has been in that organization for 100 years. I remember running into him at the combine when I was doing my radio show down there back in, what was it, early mid 2000s. He was just a young pup walking around with Gutekunst. Those two were always side by side back in the day. And I don't understand for the life of me how that man does not have a job somewhere already. And I make fun of Bears fans all the time. I was like, y'all stink. Well, why don't you hire somebody from Green Bay to come be your general manager and run things the way they run things? That would seem to make a lot of sense. Now, having said that, Bears offense looks really good this year. If Caleb Williams is anything whatsoever, they're stacked on offense, which goes back again to me talking about wanting a wide receiver, or not a wide receiver, a cornerback. But instead, with this next pick, they go back to safety position again, and this time they go to Oregon State.
Yeah, I'll just say John Eric Sullivan, he is one of my favorite interviews when he comes down during draft week and just speaks about the prospects. The insight that we gain from listening to him is just absolutely tremendous.
Yeah.
And along those lines with Oladapo, while Bullard and Williams, as we talked about, can be a slot, true safety, that versatility, he sees Oladapo more as a kind of that true safety role. I think long-term for him, he's a strong safety, going to be better playing closer to the line of scrimmage. And in terms of true skill set and pairing that with where Xavier McKinney's best, that strong safety approach or position role that Oladapo can fill in the long term, I think is a really, really good complement to what Xavier McKinney does really well. At Oregon State last season, Oladapo was one of the best in the country by PFF's grading system against the run. Again, very reliable tackler, has the athleticism to move in space, another team captain from the 2023 season. So just building out the depth at that position group, which was absolutely needed, because coming in, it was Xavier McKinney, Anthony Johnson, Benny Sapp, and Zane Anderson, and Tyler Coyle, who they signed to a futures deal. Like, that was the safety room. So this was 100% a position that they had for sure had to take 2 at, and at least 3, which they ended up, or up to 3, which they ended up doing. And again, from a skill set standpoint, long term, I think he could potentially fill that strong safety role. In the short term, he could be fill a linebacker type role when the Packers want to go big when they're in nickel. And I think he's going to be, along with Tyron Hopper, I think both of those guys are going to be really, really key special teams contributors this season.
All right, next pick, the big kid from Georgia State, Travis Glover, who never saw play. So then they draft him. So then I go looking on my phone, seeing what I could find. I like what I saw. I mean, I'm all right with it. I'm not saying he's a left tackle of the future one way or the other, but I think he can play.
Yeah, and like we referenced earlier, the Packers believe that as well because of what he showcased at the Senior Bowl, going up against that high-level competition. Another super experienced player, I think 4,200 career snaps, 5-year starter at Georgia State, can play on the left side of the line, on the right side of the line, even has some, I think it's left guard experience as well. So again, as we talk about these Packers offensive linemen, there's certain boxes that we keep kind of continually going over, and its versatility. And as far as Glover's potential role this season, if Morgan's going to be at left tackle, which is where Matt LaFleur said he's going to start out, and we know he has the ability to move around if needed, I think we're going to see Glover at the start of rookie camp training camp, all that stuff is going to be on the right side. Just getting him reps there as a backup. And I think an ideal ceiling for him as a rookie is if he could show that he can be a backup right tackle, or maybe even a swing tackle off the bench for the Packers with his experience on both sides of the line. He doesn't have again, from a relative athletic score perspective, the same athleticism that we usually see the Packers target, especially along the offensive line, but a super experienced player with positional versatility.
You could see Walker, Jenkins, Myers, and then Morgan, and then Tom at right tackle. Those are your 5, and then he's your swing tackle behind that. And I feel like you're okay. You would like more experience at the swing tackle. You'd like a veteran to be able to be the swing tackle. But holy crap, he's been in college for 5 years. And starting the whole time and getting all those snaps. I mean, I don't know how much more experience you want at that point, even though it's Georgia State and it's not a Power 5, yada, yada, yada. I get it. But I'm looking forward to training camp. I really am. Preseason. And I know the commissioner doesn't like preseason, but as a fan, I love preseason because that's when you get to see all these young guys play. And you get a chance to really see what they have. Watching them in college is one thing. Watching them, with the Packer G on and so forth, you get to take a little bit different look at them than you would just randomly watching a game on a Saturday. All right, so they said they were going to take a quarterback. He wants to be like Wolf Goody does, take a quarterback every year and try and develop. And obviously there's a long line back in the day before Ted, of drafting quarterbacks and training quarterbacks and having success. Brunell, Hasselbeck, Aaron Brooks is a 3rd-string quarterback. They were able to trade to the Saints. Ty Detmer is another one. They were able to do it. Okay, so you took Clifford last year as the backup. And now you come back and take this dude, Michael Pratt, out of Tulane, who a lot of people love, apparently, because after he was drafted, there was a lot of praise and love for this kid of how good he is. They're going to keep 3 quarterbacks? Is that what they're going to do? Or you're telling me Sean Clifford could get cut? Like, I don't know, man. It feels like they want to keep 3 quarterbacks, and I'm struggling with that one. But you tell me, Paul.
Yeah, from a roster construction standpoint in today's NFL, keeping 3 quarterbacks, you feel like you could definitely utilize that roster spot better at a different position group. And again, like you mentioned, not a surprise that they took a quarterback. Gutekunst basically told us they were going to. And I wrote about this, I think it was after the combine when he had those comments. Their decision to draft a quarterback is more just about an organizational philosophy than how they feel about Sean Clifford, that they feel that that's an upgradable position. It's the most important position in football. They feel that they should continually add to it and cultivate talent. And we've seen the Packers turn the back end of that quarterback position or the depth chart over the years. In 2021, it was Kurt Benkert. Then it was Danny Etling. Last year was Alex Magoo. Now it potentially looks like it could be Michael Pratt here in 2023. And what they like about him is, one, from a completion percentage standpoint, he continued to progress throughout his year. Every year it went up a few percentage points and capped off this past year at 66%, pretty efficient. He has a big arm, but he's shown I'm going to use maturity for lack of a better term, to know when to push the ball downfield, when to maybe try to fit it into that tight window, and then when to just take the check down, when to take what's available. Finished his career with 90 touchdowns to just 26 interceptions. So a really good understanding of the game for that perspective. And I imagine the Packers see a lot of moldable traits that they can hopefully help elevate here at the NFL level, especially with Tom Clements as the quarterback's coach. Now, as far as the backup quarterback this year, I'm still thinking Sean Clifford is absolutely the favorite for that. For one, he has a year of experience under his belt, a year of being in the Matt LaFleur system, and that already should give him a massive leg up in terms of that battle for the quarterback 2 spot. So if I had to guess right now, a couple days after the draft, Clifford's the backup, and then they might try to sneak Michael Pratt onto the practice squad.
All right, last pick, Kalen King, the cornerback out of Penn State. I'm shocked he went to the 7th round. Like I thought he would have been gone by the 5th at least. And he falls all the way to the end of the draft. I think it was Sauce Gardner that came out and pretty much said everybody's sleeping on this kid. I like him. I don't know if he makes the roster one way or the other, if they like the cornerbacks the way apparently they do like the cornerbacks. But I thought that was a great pick to end the draft.
Yeah. I mean, the 7th round, especially, it's all about taking an upside swing. You see a trait or traits that you're willing to bet on, that you think that you can develop and get to the next level. And that's what Kalen King is. He's still just 21 years old, has 3 years of playing experience at Penn State, and he was an All-American in 2022. Like this time a year ago, there were a lot of really, really smart draft analysts that thought he was going to be a first-round pick this year. So in terms of just value, which is what you're going for in the 7th round, I think a home run selection for the Green Bay Packers. And Ben Fennell, if anyone follows him on Twitter, obviously know just how great he is at watching film and identifying traits and all that stuff. He compared his NFL comparisons for Kalen King were Casey Hayward and Logan Ryan. And if we look at just from a positional standpoint, what those two did, Casey Hayward, boundary cornerback, slot cornerback. Logan Ryan played in the slot, played on the boundary, played the safety position as well. So again, going back to versatility, the more you can do in the NFL, the higher likelihood you have to stick around. For the Packers, that gives them flexibility in trying to find where they think King fits best. But again, you're betting on traits, and this was an All-American in 2022. His ball production really dipped this past season. And when Gutekunst was asked, what stood out in terms of that kind of drop off in play from 22 to 23, he didn't have anything specific to point to. But again, I think we look at the upside, the traits that are there. For a 7th round pick, I love the selection.
What pick did you like the most? What pick are you skeptical of?
So that's a great question. The pick that I like the most, I think, is Javon Bullard. Again, just his versatility and then the aggressiveness, the play mentality that he brings. I'm also a big fan of the Jacob Monk pick. Again, I think a lot of it goes back to what he brings on the football field from that mindset perspective, that competitive fire, that competitive juice, and just the extra options that it gives the Packers offensive line. Because prior to the draft, when I was asked, what's the biggest need the Packers have? I didn't pick safety. I didn't pick linebacker. I picked the offensive line. So I love the flexibility that he provides him. We know the Packers are going to be on offense, should be pretty good this year, but their ceiling, how good they are, to me is going to be determined by the play of the offensive line. And just having him there, whether it's through competition, whether he adds or wins a starting job somewhere, I think he bolsters that play. As far as the pick that I wasn't a fan of the most, I guess I'd pick probably Michael Pratt. And that's just more so because of the position, the quarterback position. Like you mentioned, is drafted Sean Clifford in the 5th round last year. I get the philosophy of wanting to have someone to develop because it's a premier position, because of how important it is. But Jordan Love is 24, 25 years old, obviously going to sign a massive extension. Sean Clifford's going into year 2 of his rookie deal. Like, if you didn't get a developmental quarterback this year, you were going to be fine. And you could also try to find your developmental quarterback through undrafted free agency, and then utilize that draft pick on, a different position. Maybe add a linebacker more. Maybe there's a receiver that you want to take a flyer on, or the cornerback position you could have addressed earlier. So my feeling around that pick has nothing to do with Michael Pratt and his game. It's just, I felt they could have gone a different direction positional.
He is Paul Bretl. Check him out at Packers Wire, part of the USA Today Network. Follow him on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. Paul, thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sparky. Always appreciate it.